Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Your weekly movement news roundup. February 11th, Give the people what they want, brought to you every week from Zoe and Prashant. They come to you from People's Dispatch. That's peoplesdispatch.org. I'm Vijay from Globetrotter. Friday, 11th of February, United States President Joe Biden signed an order this morning in the United States where he said that the Afghan funds. Now, you need to understand something. 20 years the United States occupied Afghanistan. The Afghan Central Bank, which is known as the Afghanistan Bank, it's the basically the main bank in Kabul, held much of their external reserves in the New York Federal Reserve, $9.5 billion on August the 15th of 2021, when the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. Immediately, the US government froze those assets, 9.5 billion. Very important, money for the Afghan people. That was frozen immediately at the US withdrawal. Today, the 11th of February, after all these months, United States has unfrozen that money. But what does this mean? Now, the United States is focused on 7 billion of the 9.5 billion. And Biden has said that the US government wants to divide the 7 billion into two tranches, 3.5 billion, which will go to the Afghans. No procedure created yet. It's not as if, a button is going to be pressed now and the money will flow directly to Afghanistan. A process is going to start. Not sure if that's going to be allowed because of the other tranche on the table. The remainder 3.5 billion is to be handed over to the families of people who died in the 9/11 attack. Now, right after the attacks on September 11, 2001, a group of families consolidated themselves and they opened a court case in the courts in Lower Manhattan in New York City, where they essentially targeted the government of Afghanistan for recovery of money towards paying, in a sense, for the loss of lives of people who died. They didn't blame the government of Saudi Arabia, from where most of the attackers came. They didn't blame Al Qaeda. They actually put this on Afghanistan and others as well. Between the period of this 20-year occupation by the United States, no question of delivering the money from Afghanistan, because the government in Kabul was a pro-US government. The day the Taliban took power on the 15th of August 2021, the families essentially approached the court asking for the money that was frozen by the US government in the Federal Reserve to be handed over to the families. Well, the order signed by Biden on the 11th of February is to say, well, you don't get all 9.5 billion, not even the 7 billion liquidity, the liquid money there, but you're going to get at least 3.5 billion. Now, the reason I say that the 3.5 that's supposed to go for aid to Afghanistan not going to move is that there will be immediately a challenge in court for all 7 billion to be handed to the families. This is important. United Nations in the course of the last couple of months has said by mid 2022, 97% of the Afghan people will be below the poverty line. I looked at the numbers this week. In fact, the 97% of the population is already below the poverty line based on some calculations they did with the collapse of the gross domestic product. It's already collapsed. Customs officials in Pakistan saying that trade between Pakistan and Afghanistan has collapsed down to 25% of the volume it used to be. That's the principal land trading partner. It's a very significant fall. People that I've been speaking to in Kabul say that there remains food in the marketplace. People just don't have the money to buy it. They don't have the money because employment has collapsed by about 1 million workers out of work since August. A lot of this is because the Afghan government simply doesn't have money. It doesn't have the ability to pay people. Now, they could, of course, just invent their own money and start paying people, but it doesn't work like that. It's not so easy. You have to have money backed by something. It's not so easy just to invent things. It's a dire situation in Afghanistan. 97 percent of the population beneath the poverty line. People are beginning to waste away. I have a story that will come out either later this week or early next week, which is about the wasting of children in hospitals. That's where it opens. Really bad situation. UNICEF says that we're in a very difficult place now. Keep an eye out for this. Biden has said we're going to split the money 3.5 to Afghanistan. I don't think it's going to happen, because I think the 9/11 families are actually going to stop it. That's Afghanistan. Afghanistan, I don't think, took part in the Olympics. I'm not sure. Winter Olympics took place or taking place in Beijing. I must say, I haven't followed this at all. I don't even know really what's going on. I watched a little, Zoe, of the opening ceremony, but since then, I haven't paid attention. What's been happening with the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in China?
Well, we're about a week into the Winter Olympics. The Winter Olympics are sort of smaller in scale than the Summer Olympics. A lot of skiing, skating, sports very common to snowy areas. So it's a little less all-encompassing as the Summer Olympics, which are more versatile, so to speak. But nevertheless, it has come to the center of kind of the geopolitical stage because, a month back, the U.S. rallied some of its, reliable allies, the UK, Australia, and attempted to kind of pose a diplomatic boycott of these Olympics because they're being held in Beijing in China. It was pretty ridiculous. They had one of the spokespersons of this anti-China crusade, Enes Kanter, who is a former basketball player at the Boston Celtics. I think he was just traded. And, trying to rile up people against these Olympics, saying that how can the games be held in a place that is such a, creator of genocide, human rights violations happening. They ended up abandoning this campaign because they faced so much backlash, for politicizing these games, for, impeding their athletes from, competing in these games. It's a really long process actually to participate in the Olympics, and they were trying to just put a wedge in the road for them. In the end, they ended up participating, of course, in these games. We're 1 week in, and controversy once again, because there is a Chinese American athlete who a couple years back decided that she wanted to compete for China. Her mother is, grew up in China, and many people do this. There's a lot of people who have, dual citizenship or mixed backgrounds that, maybe if they're living in one country, they decide they want to compete for another. And this skier, Eileen Gu, she is, competing for China in these Olympics games and has just received an insane amount of hate. If you Google her name, it's horrible. I mean, you see the kind of coverage the mainstream media is dedicating so much energy, dedicating all of this, hatred and vitriol about their, anti-China campaign in all senses on this 18-year-old athlete, that she's a traitor, that how could she do this, that, it's really ridiculous. And I think it speaks to the, ongoing obsession of the United States with villainizing China. At the same time, also, there's been a lot of the mainstream media reporters from, imperialist countries like the US, the UK, who have been in the, Olympic Village. And of course, we're also in the middle of a pandemic, and China has a zero COVID policy, very, very strict measures, doing everything very planned and, carefully so to make sure people aren't getting sick, to make sure they're able to participate and that nobody's life is at risk. And, they're also using this COVID policy to say, oh, this is, how could they be doing this? Look at how ridiculous it is that people are wearing these outfits and that we're contained. And these should be a celebration of sport, of, coming together of nations. The Olympics is always a very joyful occasion. It has, of course, been a politicized occasion, but I think the backlash that China is facing, that athletes are facing, that their zero COVID policy is facing from, across the board, all of these mainstream media is really, representative of how determined they are to villainize China, even when they're doing the best to, protect their own athletes, their own people, and the people from across the world. So I think, maybe don't tune into all of the skiing competitions, but do pay attention to how the media is treating China, how the media is treating these athletes, and, just their determination in this sense.
Well, generally, I like to watch sports, but for some reason, I'm not keen on the winter sports. Summer Olympics, my favorite, 1500 meters, you know 5,000 meters. Actually, I don't know, Prashant, what you like, but those middle distance things, it shows some kind of fortitude. So do these South African workers. Good God, they've been on strike since what, November? Haven't you been talking about, hasn't People's Dispatch run already enough articles about this strike? When is it going to end? It's a strike at a dairy factory, correct?
Right. The South African dairy giant Clover. And the strike started November 22nd, 2021. It's one of those, it's one of those strikes which, has captured popular imagination, not just in South Africa, not just among the dairy sector, but actually across the world. In fact, I believe towards the end of January, there were massive international protests in solidarity with the workers. Also, we'll come to that. The most recent incident, of course, was the fact that some of these workers in the Clayville factory of Clover, were attacked. And it is a very important attack to note because this is not the first time it has happened. We saw earlier last month there were instances of workers being threatened. In fact, one of the vehicles of one of the workers was attacked. But this incident also had an element of an organized attack to it, because what we saw was that taxis, suddenly came out, grabbed a couple of workers, and then took them inside the factory premises, where they were beaten up for hours. Apparently, at least 2 workers were beaten up, and 3 workers in total were hospitalized. And very scary incident because for multiple reasons. One, the workers, of course, are stating that the management was very definitely involved in this. The management has responded to us saying that they were not involved, etc., etc. But 4 people have been arrested. But the more important thing, of course, is the fact that an attack like this took place. These taxis have been known to ferry people, basically scab workers who have been breaking the picket. So there's a bit of it's a complicated and problematic picture for the workers, because it shows that there's a series of attacks going on against them, maybe because of the international solidarity, because of the effectiveness with which they've actually pushed this agenda of the workers have pushed their agenda in terms of the industrial action. Because it's important to note for them, this is not just a matter of wages. There is a matter of wages. There is a matter of retrenchments. There is a matter of the fact that a company which was supposed to give 500 additional jobs was planning to retrench more than 1,000 people. And there's this whole chain of events whereby so many promises given to the workers have been broken. And the workers have been continuously pointing out that the reason behind this is to basically destroy Clover's market and then bring in foreign products, which you talked about before. But another key thing we need to notice, of course, is one topic we come to almost every week, that Clover is essentially owned by the Israeli Central Bottling Company, which has factories in the occupied Palestinian territories. And the movement that is built up by the Clover workers, by the working class in South Africa, actually also encompasses the Palestinian solidarity movements. And that is also one reason this has become a movement much larger than one sector or the demands of just some workers, which are very important, of course. But also it has been, in some senses, a much larger struggle to bring together the working class, the trade unions, Palestinian solidarity organizations, labor itself in every sense of the term, with the kind of say solidarity that we used to see in earlier decades past, when the Palestinian cause and the workers' cause and many other progressive causes allied together very strongly. South Africa, of course, has a very long tradition of such struggles, as do many other countries. But it's especially important at a time when critics of Israel are being, stigmatized, are being called anti-Semitic, are being called all kinds of names. It's important to note that the Palestinian cause and all progressive causes across the world have this bond of solidarity that connects them. And that's actually, I think, a very interesting and important aspect of the Clover struggle as well. So the company has made some concessions in discussions. The workers still point out that many of these concessions are half concessions, or they in effect do not actually provide a lot of the benefits that the company is claiming. So at one level, discussions are going on, but I think this struggle is something that will resonate far beyond the impact of what those talks are, of the final conclusion that is reached at the discussion table. and it's a question to government of South Africa, but also governments across the world as to how do you sort of deal with a situation like this?
How do you deal with a situation like this? People's Dispatch has been on the case following this story. Looked around earlier today, Prashant, very few publications outside South Africa covering this story. Go to peoplesdispatch.org. You can read about it in some depth, including video footage of the taxis that Prashant talked about. Very chilling images. You're listening to Give the People What They Want on People's Dispatch with Prashant Zoe. I'm Vijay from Globetrotter. We're going to move on to Honduras. Recently, we celebrated on this show, well, it's an amazing thing. You got a new president, first woman president, and so on. Now there's less good news from Honduras. A court case comes in. Zoe, this has to do once again with environmentalism and environmental defenders and so on. What's been happening? What is this court case?
Well, it was bad news. And then last night, well, I'll give you this whole scoop, but there has been a reversal in this bad news. So there, in Honduras, one of the tendencies and one of the processes that happened after the coup in 2009 was that, the country, which is very rich in natural resources, there are many, forests, rivers, a lot of, minerals as well. The coup governments, the successive governments, began a process of concessioning off these territories to transnational corporations, local subsidiaries of these corporations, and just national companies within Honduras for exploitation of the minerals, hydroelectric projects, and other such projects. And in one sense, you say, okay, maybe there's going to be development, maybe this will serve the people, but by and large, all of these projects, for example, were exporting energy to other companies, were being, constructed on indigenous land, violating their land rights, destroying the very fragile ecosystems. And one such cases of these is with the Guapinol case. And this has been, a really emblematic case over the past couple of years of land defenders, of water defenders who have been in prison since 2019. They basically were pressed with pretty outrageous charges by the company itself that was trying to build this mining project, which the community alleged was illegal. They had been resisting quite, furiously, and the company retaliates by, inventing these charges, getting, false witnesses, testimonies, and creating this whole case against the community. There were, 8 defenders, water defenders in particular, that were, put in prison. There were other members of the community that were also pressed with charges, but 8 of them were actually put in prison. Since September 1st, 2019, they have been insisting that they're innocent, that all of their actions were in defense of their land and against this mining project. They were receiving threats. This is emblematic, I say, because this happens, time and time again in Honduras. Of course, the case of Berta Cáceres is really similar in this sense. She led very fierce resistance to the hydroelectric project in the Lenca territory, also received threats, was put in prison. Eventually, she was, assassinated in the midst of this case. And so the Guapinol case is really important in that sense. And it really mobilized a lot of people across Honduras society to demand their innocence, to point out that the persecution of these 8 water defenders is an example of this punitive system in Honduras, where the companies are being given the land, the communities are being kicked out, and furthermore, they're facing persecution. The whole legal system is going against them instead of protecting their rights. And so there was, for the past couple of weeks, the trial has been ongoing, which would, decide. They were in preventative detention for, the past 3 years. And so this would be their sentencing. And the day before yesterday, the court ordered that they would be continuing to be in this preventative detention. And then last night, the Supreme Court ruled that this detention was illegal and they should be immediately freed. And this victory was really, really important at this moment. As you mentioned, the first female president was just sworn in. It's a new time for Honduras. I think this case in particular, especially because first the court condemned them, the Supreme Court had to step in, I think shows, just how big the obstacles that remain are, and that it's, to really reform Honduras and to make it, a just society for people to live in. It's not enough just to change the legislator. It's not enough to just have a new president, but the entire legal system in the country has been set up, has been designed to persecute the people. And so that this process is going to be a lot longer, much deeper. But, that it is important to keep fighting these battles, to keep, defending the land, defending the rivers, and defending the people who are protecting them.
It's an important story. I'm glad to hear about this reversal. We're going to move now to India, to the southwest state of Karnataka. The town of Udupi was the real epicenter of this. I've, of course, always think of Udupi as vegetarian food, but I know it's a real place. And in this case, it had nothing to do with vegetarianism, although that's been itself a battle in India around beef eating and so on. Seems to be a same kind of thing as the whole beef question, Prashant. This is now about Muslim girls in particular covering their head, in other words, the hijab. What's been happening in Karnataka, in Udupi, and in the whole of India, really?
Right, Vijay. It's a very disturbing series of events, actually, because what we've seen over the past weeks, actually, this has been going on for weeks. It's not a new thing. It's been escalating with courts getting into the picture, with governments giving all kinds of instructions. But fundamentally, the issue is that towards the end of last year, girls who were wearing the hijab were not allowed to enter a college in Udupi district because apparently it was against the norms of the uniform. That's what the college administration said. And these girls, of course, were unhappy. They sort of protested, as there was a photo of them sitting in the halls of the college or the stairs because they were not allowed into classes, which kind of went all across social media. And it was a bit puzzling as to why, this is an issue, because across the country, we have people of innumerable religions, faiths. In India, people come to education institutions. There are often marks of faith in some of them. That's generally how things are. That's how all of us have seen. That's how all of us have been to school. So you really can't sort of what the authorities, starting from the administration, the local college administration, to various sections of the government, have sort of tried to present this as some kind of attitude of fairness or attitude of equality or uniformity, where it's like, okay, we don't allow any kind of any kind of religious expression or whatever. But what actually this is pretty clear. Karnataka is a state where the Bharatiya Janata Party, the ruling party, is in power. There is a long history of Karnataka being one of those states which has been used as a laboratory to sort of create this Hindu-centric vision of society, where the minorities are basically stigmatized, where the minorities are treated as second-class citizens. And this seems part of a larger agenda to sort of bring that about. And it's instructive because we're not even saying that, this was ordered from the highest levels of government also. This is kind of instructive as to how, when a government behaves like this, every level of society chooses to respond in this way. And it's not just the fact that these girls are not allowed to enter classes because they're wearing the hijab. But once this became an issue, there was mobilization in which young boys, for instance, in large numbers, started wearing saffron scarves to school, and behaving in a hooliganish manner, confronting some of these girls, creating a massive air of tension, a very extreme kind of, so some very shocking visuals and videos coming out of many of these education institutions. So an education institution becomes a space for strife because these organized groups of boys wearing these scarves in a very threatening manner going ahead. And this has given the administration the opportunity to sort of come down and say, okay, there are going to be no symbols of religious expression at all. So this is actually in some ways how this entire issue has been stage managed, or say handled in such a way as to basically tell the minorities that, in this case the Muslims, of course, but in other times Christians are the targeted, that basically you're walking a very thin line here. At any moment of time, anything you do, whether it be a choice of food, whether it be a choice of clothes, could be a reason for you to be targeted. And a very important thing to note is that fundamentally these students are being denied the right to attend classes. So, and the Indian Constitution is a wide variety of provisions about equality, about the right to practice your religion, about the right to education, all of which seem to be getting violated in this process. And now basically the courts have also said that, okay, we don't want to cause tension. So again, no clothing that causes controversy. That's the general term that various sections, administrative authorities are throwing around. So this has been a issue which has been sort of taken in 1.5 months to tell the entire country, and this is, like I said, not just one incident, to tell minorities in the entire country that your existence, your access to public spaces, any aspect of your life could be under threat, purely because of the fact that purely because of your religion, or purely because of your identity or whatever. So in that way, this is not just one localized incident. This is an incident that speaks, I think, to how India as a whole is pretty much shaping up, which is really a cause for concern.
It's an insane story, Prashant, because I mean, the whole of Indian society is filled with all kinds of expressions of religion. I come from a Sikh family. People wear turbans all over the place. You and I worked for a newspaper where people had giant caste marks painted on their foreheads and so on.
And important to note that the chief minister of India's largest province is the head of a religious order and is always clad in saffron. So,
And the
yeah.
prime minister has been seen recently dressed in all kinds of interesting Star Wars like robes. So it's a bizarre story, but of course, not so bizarre. It's a direct assault. We're going to close out today's show with a little update again on Ukraine, because God knows what's happening there. But let's start with buffoonish prime ministers. Boris Johnson, now a photograph has appeared of him at one of those parties in Christmas, standing there behind a fellow with tinsel on his head and, bottles of Prosecco on the table and so on. Well, he's immediately decamped to NATO headquarters, front line of the struggle, now going to Warsaw, Poland, England on the case, Boris Johnson in the lead. Let's forget about the scandal that's detaining him at home. But there's actually more chilling business before us. We have the United States making the statement that Russian troops must withdraw from the Ukraine-Russia border. In fact, just yesterday, Thursday, the 10th of February, there were exercises conducted by Russian and Belarusian troops, about 30,000 troops, not far from the border, but still on the Russian side, it should be said. Meanwhile, there are 500 US troops in Lithuania. The Lithuanian government has asked for more troops. There are special forces troops in Ukraine. That is in the public. It's not secret information. But quite chillingly, the government of Denmark has asked, that is Mette Frederiksen, the social democratic head of the government in Denmark, has asked for US troops to enter. Now, this has created a little scandal in Denmark about the entry of US troops, apparently barred for decades. On the other hand, Greenland is a colony of Denmark. And in Greenland, the US has a base and has had one for a long time. It's really interesting how these stories get reported. One tends to forget what exists and then says, wow, there's a controversy in Denmark around US troops entering, already troops there. And there is also, of course, no hesitation to say Russians have to withdraw from the border on their own territory, but the United States can send troops to Ukraine, Lithuania, Denmark, and other countries, including Poland. Very strange period we're in right now. There was a meeting held between the UK's defense minister and the Russian defense minister. It's an important meeting, took place in Moscow. Sergei Shoigu, he talked to the United Kingdom's people, and he said that, look, let's start a process as a defense chief to defense chief, in a way, or civilian leader of the military to defense chief, by slowing down on weapons deliveries into Ukraine. Let's start a process of trust building and so on. I don't think that's going to be taken seriously at all. The United Kingdom and NATO have been saying that Russia is going to do some kind of false flag operation in Donbass, to, in a sense, allow Russia to intervene. Not sure exactly what the evidence of that is, but this is chilling. And one hopes that they'll be able to dial back from this. Looks like Emmanuel Macron is going to play a role in doing some of the dialing back at NATO headquarters this week and into the weekend. Let's see. We'll be following this carefully. You've been listening to Give the People What They Want. We hope this is what you want. Let us know what you think. We always look for your suggestions. Always happy to hear from you. You have good stories that we don't cover, tell us. We'd like to know about them. Also, you've got documents to send us, send it to us, okay? Give the people what they want. Coming to you every Friday. See you next week. Are we coming back?
Vaishak, you have to end the live.
No. Oh.